Good day. I'm Derek Brent. Welcome to The Pipeline, our weekly affairs broadcast here. I'm joined today by Corey Morgan, Alberta political columnist and host of The Corey Morgan Show. How you doing, Corey?
Good.
And also joined by Dave Naylor, news editor of The Western Standard. Dave, what are you doing today?
Well, up to my neck, Derek, but happy hump day to you and Corey.
I know you've got a pretty full plate today, so we appreciate both of your time with us. Remember that the Western Standard refuses to accept a penny of government funding. We are funded solely by advertisers and by voluntary members like you. If you're a member of the Western Standard already, thank you very much for your support. If you're not, please consider becoming a member. Try it free for 15 days. See if you like it. Go to westernstandardonline.com/membership. Try a free trial and see if you want to support some bailout-free media. Today's sponsor is Kyron's Way. Kyron's Way is a all-natural, non-pharmaceutical treatment plan available, based in Calgary, dealing with stress relief in some pretty particularly stressful times. Try to find treatments to help you find work-life balance. So check out chironsway.com. A fantastic sponsor helping to make today's show possible. Well, today we're going to be dealing with some really interesting issues. We've got the coming Supreme Court of Canada constitutional ruling on the carbon tax. That comes down likely tomorrow morning. We're going to give you a primer on that. In Alberta here, Jason Kenney has backed off of his own phased reopening plan again. We will get into that and what it means for people in Alberta and people outside of Alberta, kind of looking at what happens in the province, that it should theoretically be leading the way on restoring some of our basic freedoms here. And speaking of not having basic freedoms, but winning against the system, Pastor Coates has been released from jail. The Grace Life Church pastor has been set free with a $1,500 fine, far short of what I think they were hoping to do to him, which involved some kind of drawing and quartering. So we're going to begin with the Supreme Court of Canada constitutional ruling coming up tomorrow. Dave, why don't you give us a primer?
Well, this is a ruling that's going to be happening bright and early tomorrow, Derek, and I'm sure a lot of people in Alberta from the Premier's office on down will be up with the sun when that comes in. They are going to be ruling whether the federal carbon tax is constitutionally legal. In lower court rulings, I think there's been three cases. 7 of the 15 judges have said that the ruling is just too broad, gives cabinet way too much power. So this was all about the carbon tax, which was brought in 2018 at a mere $50 a ton, and the government then vowed it would never ever increase. And of course, guess what? It's going up to $170 a ton, a 240% increase. So that's going to cost your liter of gasoline 40 cents more a liter. So imagine that on a big pickup truck, how much that's going to cost you to fill up. So in earlier appeals, the Court of Appeal upheld it 4-1 in Ontario, but the Court of Appeal in Alberta was exactly the opposite. They struck it down 4-1. So what the court is going to rule tomorrow is anybody's guess, Derek, but a lot of people keeping their fingers crossed.
Corey, we know that the Supreme Court of Canada has an excellent record at protecting provincial jurisdiction and personal freedoms. You're a constitutional lawyer, Corey. Why don't you tell us what you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I wish I was a constitutional lawyer, because there's certainly enough to keep them busy these days on these sorts of things. I really, it's a roll of the dice. It's been split coming up all the way through the courts. They're going to be hearing the similar arguments to it. And it's really anybody's guess which way they're going to land, because I think there's valid arguments both ways. I mean, this will be a crushing tax, particularly as Dave mentioned with those massive increases they've got planned. And it's not just per liter on your fuel. Like, this will raise the cost of living on everything. An energy tax is like a GST. I mean, every bit of goods that are transported, farms. I mean, they talk about a rebate system, but a rebate system is never efficient. So I think that, typically the federal government can get away with a lot under the Constitution, and the Supreme Court will take that into consideration. But whether or not they'll take into consideration the actual impacts of the tax, that's, I guess, not necessarily their role, but I hope they keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's this is obviously going to be one of the most watched Supreme Court rulings, probably since the same-sex marriage rulings approaching 20 years ago. This is going to have a profound impact on not just the tax structure of Canada, but federal-provincial relations. Jason Kenney and some of the other premiers who have fought against at least portions of the federal carbon tax have been pinning all of their hopes on this court decision. They're only, though, fighting they're not fighting the entire carbon tax. The federal government, the provincial government in Alberta and in Saskatchewan and elsewhere, they have already accepted the federal carbon tax on industry. So there is the carbon tax on the oil sands and oil extraction, things like that. We already have a carbon tax there. What we have right now is the federal carbon tax imposed directly on consumer goods in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, in Ontario. There we have the federal carbon tax directly being imposed. I don't recall ever seeing a rebate myself, but frankly, I don't want a rebate on an unjust tax. I just don't want the tax, period. But this is going to have a profound impact, I think, on federal-provincial relations. Dave, how would you expect both Premier Kenney and Premier Moe to react in the event that they're not successful and the Supreme Court reaffirms the federal government's right to impose a strangely structured tax like this?
It's a good question, Derek, and anybody's guess, really. This is the court of last appeal, so to say. And if Alberta loses and they're in the same boat as Saskatchewan, there's nowhere else to appeal to. They're stuck with it. As to what Kenney will do, jump up and down, stamp his feet, maybe blast the government some more. What it will do if the Supreme Court upholds the carbon taxes, it will add more fuel to the fire of the Wild Rose Independence Party and other independence-minded groups, because they'll point it out and say, "Look, we can't deal with this. We cannot get a fair deal. We've got to strike out on our own." So that's what Kenney's going to do. I'm sure they're huddled talking about it as we speak.
That's an interesting point. That Kenney used to have kind of the right flank in the arguments in Alberta, where the NDP were the staunch federal party. Kenney was the guy who was going to fight Ottawa. So far, the fight back strategy hasn't appeared to work at all. What we've got, if this Supreme Court decision does not go the province's way, it will allow sovereigntists to say that working with Ottawa or even fighting Ottawa within Confederation simply doesn't work. The NDP's approach in Alberta was to work with Ottawa, hope it would work out well. I think most people would say it didn't. Kenney's approach is to yell at Ottawa and fight it in the courts. So far, it hasn't yielded anything. Equalization has been renewed for another term. The Supreme Court is now going to decide tomorrow the future of the fight on that front. Then we've got, we've got an interesting question from Chris Leavam. I probably said that wrong. Chris Leavam. Can the provinces use the notwithstanding clause in this circumstance? No, they can't, because the notwithstanding clause applies only to the right of the federal government of provinces to overturn a Supreme Court ruling as it involves the Charter of Rights, which is one part of the Constitution, but just that single part of the Constitution, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It doesn't apply to the broader British North America Act, which was replaced by the Constitution Act 1982, or parts of the Constitution Act 1982. So, for instance, the provinces can't overturn federal jurisdiction over the military. Unfortunately, Alberta can't use the notwithstanding clause and say, nope, the Army is under Alberta's jurisdiction. So that's something that we're not able to do. So the notwithstanding clause is not applicable in this case. In this case, if the federal government, if the Supreme Court of Canada rules in favor of the federal carbon tax, provinces, there are really only a few choices. One is accept it, campaign for a party to come to power to change the policy you don't like, or as some would say, just leave Canada and then not be subject to the Supreme Court's decision any longer. So really not many easy options in that case. Corey, maybe you could elaborate on this. This is, I think, a key pillar of Jason Kenney's fight back strategy, as he's called it, against what he says is unfair treatment from Ottawa. If the Supreme Court ruling doesn't go his way, what do you think the fallout will be? And then maybe if you can comment on the flip side of that, if he is victorious in court here, what will that mean for Kenney's political strategy going forward?
Yeah, well, this is kind of a battle between the federalist approach and some people who have already given up hope on the system and are examining things such as secession and independence for the West. If the Supreme Court rules that it's perfectly constitutional for the federal government to impose such a serious tax that's definitely regionally targeted, I mean, it's going to impact the prairie provinces way more disproportionately than the East, then that indicates that as far as a lot of people are concerned, the system is broken and we can't win by playing through the rules, which are the Supreme Court. So it's time to start looking outside of the rules. If it is a win, though, Jason Kenney will be able to really point to the regionalists and say, you see, we can, if we keep battling, we keep struggling and keep fighting, the system will work for us eventually, and we can win it through the courts. We can protect our provincial jurisdiction. So a lot is really riding on this case because Kenney's been a very dedicated federalist. So he's not going to have much defense if the Supreme Court rules against the province in this case. A lot is riding here, and I think Kenney really had better hope for a favorable ruling.
Oh, I'm interested in the federal political ramifications of this. Aaron O'Toole campaigned vigorously against the carbon tax when he ran for the Conservative leadership. Well, at least that was the headlines for most of the mainstream media. We reported something a bit different. There was a bit more nuance to it. Aaron O'Toole campaigned against the Trudeau carbon tax, but said that he did favor, quote, carbon pricing and would work with the provinces on that. That actually doesn't sound very different from what Justin Trudeau said, except we might just not call it a carbon tax. But for the record, Justin Trudeau's carbon tax is not actually called a carbon tax. It's some more convoluted plan. Rachel Notley's carbon tax was called the Climate Leadership Action Plan, the CLAP, as I like to call it. And we know how difficult to get rid of that is. So I'm interested to see how Aaron O'Toole would respond to this. Surely would be happy to see a defeat for the Trudeau government in the Supreme Court. But he's been very coy around the idea of a carbon tax. The media have started to raise questions. They've started to catch on that maybe this guy isn't really against a carbon tax. He's just against this particular carbon tax. Let's go back to you, Corey. What do you think the fallout will be? How do you think Aaron O'Toole is going to handle this? Because he's been promising this big, vigorous climate change crusade, promise to make the Conservative Party more relevant in parts of urban and Eastern Canada. How do you think this might, in the event, again, maybe for both scenarios, both for a victory for the carbon tax or a defeat for the carbon tax? What do you think those two scenarios portend for Aaron O'Toole?
Well, I think he'd prefer to see a defeat of the carbon tax, just out of the sense that it's in his favor to see the governing party, the Liberals, fail in one of their initiatives. But that was a large controversial element from last weekend's convention. I mean, Aaron O'Toole clearly is gearing up for an election campaign to say that they're going to take a green plan and carbon initiatives just like the Liberals. They're just saying perhaps we'll be more likable about it, which I don't think is the case for the West. He's and the membership, when it came to that climate change motion that came before the floor, slapped it down. They told O'Toole to jam his motion on climate change. So it's a dicey area. I think just on a point of pride, I guess you could say, it'll be good for O'Toole if this tax gets slapped down. If it doesn't get knocked down by the courts, again, well, where's O'Toole going to go with it? What's he going to say that he is doing any different than Justin Trudeau? I'd worry if the court slapped it down, O'Toole will come out and campaign in the East saying, well, we're going to come up with a carbon tax that the courts will like.
I hope you're wrong, but I fear you're not. Well, let's bring it a little closer to home here. Jason Kenney is backing off the phase 3 of his reopening plan. We had, we remember in pretty early January, right after the big snowbird scandal, kind of out of nowhere, we had this restaurant rebellion. These rogue restaurant owners said, look, I'm going to go out of business if the government keeps me closed. And all they're doing, and the government's proposing to fine me or jail me. Well, I'm going to take my chances going toe to toe with the government and reopening anyway. And so we had, began with the whistle stop in near Mirror, Alberta, and it really started to catch on like a prairie fire. Exponentially more small businesses, small restaurants opening every single day. I think all of them were small independent owns. I don't believe any of the chains did it. They tend to be a bit more deferential to the government, but this really got out of control for the government here. And with the really just two choices in front of him, Jason Kenney could either start throwing these people in jail, or he could try to appease them somewhat. And so we had this phased reopening plan where if we met certain targets by certain dates, there would be a reopening. Last time we had the phase 2 a few weeks ago. The numbers in Alberta already were at the numbers to warrant a phase 3 reopening, but they didn't go to phase 3. They said, no, we're doing phase 2 first, even though the numbers said phase 3 would be applicable. But they didn't even do phase 2. I think they did a partial reopening of libraries or something. I don't know who still goes to those things. People without the internet, I guess. But then there was a huge backlash from kind of the conservative base in the province, and then from 6 MLAs who spoke up publicly, led by Drew Barnes, but joined by some others who were, I think, less expected to speak out. So then the government finally did go through with phase 2. Dave, why don't you tell us what's happened here more with phase 3, what the plan was for reopening, and what we actually got?
Derek, I liken it to a football player, a kicker. And on the last play of the game, he's got to kick a 50-yard field goal to seal the victory. And he boots it with all his might. And as it's just approaching the goal line, the officials get up and move the goalposts. And that's exactly what the Kenney government has done. They promised us at the very start of this pandemic that once we got in below 300 hospitalizations, that we would move on to phase 3. Which would have seen things like allowing more gatherings at church, openings of casinos, more children's sports, that type of thing. But even though there were only 280 people in hospital when the announcement was made on Monday, they did not go ahead with it. They say, yeah, we're under 300 now, but by the end of the week, we expect to be over 300. So moving the goalposts yet again. And they say their big concern now is the variants. They're now tracking more than 100 new variant cases a day, which is a growth of between 20 and 25%. So I think that was their main excuse in not moving on to phase 3. But the average Albertan again feels betrayed, lied to almost. In our initial story, Drew Barnes was complaining again that we've done everything everybody's asked, and we're not getting the rewards that we were promised. So what the new yardstick is, I don't know. They're still saying 300, but I guess it's all going to depend on the variants and how they go.
Yeah, for those of you who didn't see it yet, last night we had a fantastic show with Danielle Uncensored on the Western Standard, interviewing deplatformed doctors. She had 3 really intelligent doctors who are, at least in large measure, deplatformed for their dissenting views from the chief medical officers and from the politicians. where they really got into this in some detail, and why a lot of the metrics governments are using to even track this stuff really just does not make sense right now. Just active cases is a terrible measure to be using. The way they're measuring who's actually infected is not reliable. The data is often old. It's conflated. It's far too much to get into right now, but if you haven't already watched it, check out it. You can find it on our website, westernstandardonline.com. We have it posted from YouTube there. You can also watch it directly on the Facebook page, which might be handy if you're watching it on us on Facebook right now. Corey, the last time Kenney moved the goalposts on phase 2, there was a massive backlash, and he was forced to climb down again in the face of a caucus rebellion. Do you think we have the prospect of that happening again, or do you think the government's going to be in the all clear here?
I don't know. I'm getting, to be blunt, sick and tired of them bowing to the fear-mongering crap. And that's what it is. It's crap. I mean, I've been throwing it in their face on social media over and over again, and I'm going to continue to. They are doing their governing based on models which have proven to be wrong for an entire year. Every model they put out is hysterically exaggerated on what they project to actually happen. So when they stand up there and say we expect these infections to be through the roof next week, I call BS. I'm sick of it. You guys put out those projections back in January, and you said this variant was going to have 3,000 cases by now. We're sitting under 300. And yeah, they use the caveat to say, oh, it went up a little. We wanted to see it under 300 and going downwards again, inserting the fine print all the time. Well, what if it goes down by 5 tomorrow? Well, you open things up. It's just the reticence on opening up, the cowardice on the part of the government, but they're also cowardice when citizens push back. This is part of why their support is going into the toilet, because they're infuriating everybody. The people who want everything locked up, they get mad every time he does back down in the face of public opposition, and the public is just getting sick and tired of these constantly moving goalposts. You can't plan. You can't expect an Easter dinner or a life or summer vacationing or reopening your business, and you can't count on anything the government tells you as their metrics for it, because they keep moving them as they go. So I've just had enough of it, and I think a lot more people have.
I think, Corey, you may need to visit Kyron's Way. You're sounding a bit stressed there. I will point out the questions after the press conference on Monday were focused on, hey, are we going to go back into phase 1? And of course, they didn't rule that out. The other note I wanted to mention was one supporter of keeping it in phase 2 was NDP leader Rachel Notley. Earlier Monday, she had pleaded with the government not to lessen the regulations, saying that we're just not ready for it yet. So the government did have some support from the NDP of all places.
Wow. NDP supporting the UCP's move. We wonder why the UCP base is a little upset right now. All right, well, we're going to move it on to good news coming from this mess. Pastor James Coates, the pastor of Grace Life Church in Stony Plain, Alberta, just west of Edmonton, was released from jail. Jail is a strange term for this, because he was actually being held in a maximum security penitentiary with murderers and rapists. Luckily for him, we might say, he was held in solitary confinement. I suppose that's the only way the government figured they could isolate him. In my review, we had his wife, Erin Coates, on the Western Standard. Danielle Smith, Uncensored, had a run for a full 2-hour broadcast. We had John Carpe on from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. The JCCF is representing Pastor Coates and many of these other cases going on right now. They were in large measure successful, released from jail finally, and given a $1,500 fine, which is considerably less than the fines and jail time that the Crown was trying to get from him. Dave, why don't you fill us in? How long was he in jail for, and what were the circumstances of the release?
He's been in jail since mid-February, Derek, after repeatedly breaking COVID-19 pandemic laws by having PAC services at his Grace Life Church. just outside Edmonton. He appeared in court virtually on Monday, dressed in the traditional orange jailhouse overalls. And he was freed by the Justice Champion, but not without a good tongue lashing. The Crown and the defense had proposed a fine of $100. The judge said, "I don't think that's enough," and he retired to think about it. And he came back and raised it to $1,500, and gave the pastor an earful. The pastor had told the justice, quote, "I am not a political revolutionary." But the judge sort of really spanked him, saying, quote, "He wants to make a statement that he cannot be bound by the undertaking. But I want to make a statement about people who refuse to obey public health orders during the pandemic," said Champion. He basically said, the law applies to everybody, and the jail time you've done is because you broke the law. So the Crown has dropped all but one public health charge against the pastor now, and he's been released. And he's been released without any conditions that he stop preaching. You remember at two previous bail hearings, he could have gone free if he'd have signed the document to say, "I will not preach." But he stood by his beliefs and refused to sign it. And so he spent the month in solitary. So he's out. He's back home with Aaron, and I fully expect him to be behind the pulpit again on Sunday. Grace Life Church just outside Edmonton.
Incredible stuff. Corey, do you think there might be a few reasons why the government dropped most of the charges against Pastor Coates? One is this is just terrible press. This is not something the government wants to see. Now, the prosecutor is not the government in this sense. Yes, they're working for the government, but the prosecutor is not a political appointee. But the prosecutors do work for the Minister of Justice and Solicitor General. And we do know that governments do intervene in some cases to put pressure to maybe not push too hard. Do we think that this? I'd like your opinion. Do you think that that this has been dropped because it was simply bad press? Do you think it was dropped because they thought they would lose, or was it because these charges would all inevitably lead to a constitutional challenge in the Supreme Court, which could end up essentially killing the lockdown and many of these restrictions nationally if it was successful?
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination of the first and third things you mentioned. So I'll start with the first part. Public pressure works. I mean, the courts never like to admit that. They like to say they're above that. But in truth, when the public is livid and they're off, the courts are offside with them, there will be pressure on prosecutors and others to back off. Again, I bring up like the Eddie Maurice case a couple of years ago, the young father who'd defended his home against burglars and a fellow got shot in the arm. They kept kicking the can down the road with his hearings. And still there was always 150 protesters standing outside the Okotoks courthouse before the prosecutor sort of found a shaky thing and just pulled out of the case and let him go. In the case of Coates, I mean, we saw on the Western Standard, there was coverage, Danielle did that fantastic interview with his wife, Erin Coates. And then that moved on even to Tucker Carlson. I mean, one of the highest rated shows in North America. Speaking of this imprisoned pastor, it looks terrible and it puts that pressure on, and they need to pull the escape hatch. The other part is, and as other people are commenting on, if this kept going through the courts, for one, there would be disclosure. So the government would actually have to have a public spectacle of making their case. Why are we cracking down on human freedoms like this, particularly free religion? And they don't want to go into that discussion in open. So, I mean, they get themselves out of that. And thirdly, as you said, if this went on, as the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms was saying, into a full constitutional or charter challenge, they could lose, and that could shut down lockdowns all across the country. So they, as much as they're getting egg on their face and letting Coates out and dropping those conditions because he refused to abide by any, a very brave man, they've backed out because they really were cornered, and it was good to see.
Dave, we've got Cheryl Dawn says, how come the Western Standard doesn't ask real questions at Hinshaw pressers? Dave, why don't you tell us how Hinshaw pressers go with you? Dave, you're on mute. Dave, you are on mute.
And I was doing so well. Yeah, we've tried multiple times, and the bottom line is they do not take questions from us. We were on the line with them Monday and waiting patiently with all the other reporters, and we just never get asked. And it's not only Hinshaw; it's the Jason Kenney press conferences. We're never allowed to ask any questions there. So they decide who gets to ask and who doesn't, and they obviously don't want to hear from us, Derek.
These online press conferences are really bad for accountability. Traditionally, but when I was in politics, you would have a real press conference in front of human beings. And if you were sitting there, Dave, with your hand up like a polite schoolboy saying, "Hey, I want to ask a question," and every single day that you're there, I'm not pointing to you saying, "Okay, Dave, I'll answer your bloody question." It would look embarrassing, and the rest of the press would see this. But now we've got these conference calls, and it allows some kid in short pants making 3 times the salary that they're qualified for to select who gets to ask questions. And none of the rest of the press have any idea who actually is even trying to answer questions. So we know that both Premier Kenney and Dina Hinshaw, they like taking questions from everybody, including French CBC, but they don't take questions from the Western Standard. So if any of you are wondering why we're not asking questions of Dina Hinshaw or Jason Kenney, it's because we are asking questions, but our reporters are never selected to actually ask the questions. So that would be why. Gentlemen, any final thoughts before we close?
Just a reminder to attend Danielle's show tomorrow night. It's going to be another great one with the Rogue Caucus there. And my show, the second episode, will be coming up Friday. I'll have Michelle Sterling with the Friends of Science on, and Spencer Fernando to talk about some federal political issues. So it should be a really good show, 10 o'clock Friday morning.
Shame on me for not plugging that. Go ahead, Dave.
Derek, just to remind viewers that the Supreme Court ruling tomorrow on carbon tax will be coming down about 7:30 Calgary time. I'll be on it, so keep checking back on the website for the breaking news and reaction throughout the day as it comes in.
Dave is on the case. And shame on me for not plugging your show. Corey Morgan is now got his own regular show. Corey's done some ad hoc from time to time shows, but now every Monday and every Friday, 10 a.m. to 12 Mountain Standard Time, we're going to have the Corey Morgan Show. Very soon, we're going to also be announcing another show based in British Columbia on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays to go alongside Corey. So be sure to check out the Corey Morgan Show every Monday and Friday. You can watch it live on Facebook or YouTube, and you can always catch it on podcast as well. I'm very excited about that. I know it's going well. And yes, again, tomorrow we've got another episode of Danielle Smith Uncensored. She'll be interviewing members of the Liberty Caucus. That'll include Maxime Bernier of the People's Party, Paul Hinman of the Wild Rose Independence Party, Drew Barnes of the United Conservative Party, and Randy Hillier, independent MPP in Ontario, formerly of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party. That's going to be a really, really great episode. All very interesting people who are some of those rare politicians who actually say something interesting, not on the talking points from time to time. Again, today's show was sponsored by Chiron's Way. Chiron's Way provides natural, non-pharmaceutical treatments and programs for stress relief. Check out chironsway.com. Again, if you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, go to westernstandardonline.com/membership. Sign up and try a Western Standard membership for 15 days free. See if you like Western-based, Western-owned, non-bailout media. If you like it, we'd be very grateful for your support. Thank you all very much for joining me today. It's been fantastic. Corey, we'll see you again tomorrow morning.
Friday.